Chapter 2. The next day, George did as his dog told him to and sent a message to the castle. He asked for a small knapsack filled with dried meats, a bronze ring, a bucket of silver paint, and a bag of gold coins. When the messenger arrived with these items and asked what good the paint would do a traveling man, George admitted he didn't know. He could only request that the king be notified of the departure of brave George. He was leaving today to hunt the dragon. Back at the shack beneath the giant oak, George the dog was fitted with the knapsack so he could easily pull it free with his teeth or roll himself into its straps. With his clean fur and perfect posture, he looked like a well-trained errand hound. "Master," he called, "please come here and dip each one of my toenails into the silver paint." The lad did so. He then admired the metallic shine of his dog's feet.
"With your pack and hard claws, you look splendid,"
he said proudly.
"And you have enough money to buy yourself more food when the meat runs out." "That is not what the gold coins are for," the dog said. "Now, we must get going." George took only minutes to place his few possessions into an old grain bag. With the sun high in the sky, he left the shack behind, stepped out from under the protective branches of the giant oak, and followed his dog across the meadow and through the fields. They hiked through prairie grasses that tickled his nose. They climbed hills and slid down the other side. They stopped by a tiny bubbling brook to have a short rest. All the while, they chatted about what they saw. Busy anthills, purple coneflowers, amusing shapes in the clouds. It felt good to walk away from the city where no one knew what to do with George. Out here, he was just a man with his dog. Whenever they passed through a town, people asked to pet the pooch. George smiled and nodded, and watched with great satisfaction as they bent down to tell the dog what a good boy he was. They loved to see him wag his tail and roll onto his side for belly rubs. Children especially liked to see him sit, roll over, and shake their hand. As the sun began to set, George looked up at the pink and violet clouds. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded only by rolling hills of grass and flowers. "It is almost supper time," he said. "We should have some of the king's rations and lay down to sleep."
The dog shook his head.
"No, we need to find a house to stay in, for we cannot eat anything in the knapsack, nor sleep under the open sky. We are lucky not to have seen the dragon yet, and he must not see us first." "I understand," George said. "So we shall trade the king's trinket for a meal and a bed?"
"No," the dog replied.
"That is not what the bronze ring is for."
Despite his befuddlement, George did not quarrel, and the young man knocked on the door of the first house they came to. Out here in the countryside between villages, it was rare to see fellow travelers on the road, and even rarer to see houses. This one was quite shabby. The bricks were beginning to crumble, the thatching was patchy, and no smoke exited the chimney.
"I think no one is home,"
George said. Suddenly, the door opened a crack, and an old woman stuck her head out.
"What do you want?"
she snapped.
"I have nothing for you to rob."
"We are looking for a safe place to rest,"
George said as kindly as he could, intimidated by her harsh tone.
"And perhaps a corner of a loaf of bread to fill our stomachs."
"I have none of that,"
the old woman snarled.
"My stomach is as empty as yours."
"Is there anything we can give you that will change your mind?"
George asked helplessly.
"Nothing," she cried. "Not all the king's gold. Now go and leave me alone."
Just as she was about to slam the door in their faces, the dog put out his paw to stop it. "Please forgive my master," he said. "He is confused from hunger and exhaustion. We ask only for a place to lie down in front of a cold hearth and a cook-pot with nothing in it." Taken by surprise by these requests, the old woman let the door creak open a bit more.
"A cold hearth and an empty pot?"
she asked.
"As empty as your stomach,"
the dog said.
"Well,"
she said doubtfully.
"I suppose I do have those things."
And she let them in. The cottage was as dreary inside as it was out. It was a single room furnished with broken chairs and cobwebs. George was having as much trouble as the old woman understanding what they were doing here when there was neither food nor warmth to be found. He simply watched as she brought out the cook pot, hung it on the hook over the ashes, and gestured to the stone-cold fireplace.
There, she said. You have what you asked for. Now what do you intend to do with it?
Quite pleased, the dog trotted over.
I am going to make bronze soup,
He said.
And how do you do that?
The woman asked, incredulous.
It is very simple.
The dog said as he tugged off his knapsack and dug into it with his snout. He pulled out the bronze ring. Then he went to the pot and dropped it inside with a great clang.
I have placed the magic ring into the pot.
And now I shall fill it with water.
Master, why don't you have a seat on the floor and wait? I must find a river and bring back one mouthful of water at a time.
Oh, don't do that.
The old woman grumbled.
I'll just bring you a bucket full from the well.
She shuffled off and soon returned with enough water to fill the cauldron. As she poured it in, she looked down at the ring expectantly.
It is done,
The dog proclaimed.
It is?
The old woman and the young man asked in unison.
Yes,
Was the answer.
it is bronze soup. Of course, it would taste better if the water were boiled. Hot meals are always better.
Nodding, the old woman thought for a moment and said,
I suppose I do have enough firewood for one pot of soup.
She went out the back door again and came back with her arms full of logs, which she arranged beneath the cookpot. Within minutes, they had a crackling fire, and she stood beside the fireplace waiting for Bubbles.
How wonderful,
The dog said.
it could hardly be better. If only...
If only what?
The old woman demanded. Please forgive me, was the reply. I cannot help but mention that bronze soup tastes best with a few vegetables added to it.
We are not kings, and I should not expect so much.
Rubbing her chin, the old woman admitted she might have something to spare, and went away again. All the while, the lad stared into the pot, waiting for a miracle, and the dog sat perfectly still. The old woman brought in a basket filled to bursting with onions, carrots, and greens that she washed, chopped, and added to the pot. It was beginning to look quite full and jolly. George yawned, lulled by the fire and the darkness outside.
It's perfect, spectacular,
The dog exclaimed.
almost fit for a king.
Almost.
The old woman asked angrily.
What more could a king ask for?
Salt and pepper, a bit of cream, a clean bowl to drink from, the dog said dreamily, as if such things were imaginary. It will be just fine the way it is. I will lap at it with my long tongue, and my master will dip his hands in. The old woman shook her head vigorously. What nonsense, she mumbled as she went to each of the cabinets, pulling containers out of each. These items were carried to the hearth and added to the cauldron one at a time. She even found a long spoon to stir with. Next, she went outside again and came back with a few cups of milk in a bucket, and that too went into the soup. Finally, the lady of the house began aggressively scrubbing the furniture, dusting the cobwebs, and wiping china until a very nice table had been set out for their meal. When she finished, she stood there with her hands on her hips, daring the dog to say that anything could be better.
No king could deny the splendor of a meal like this, he complimented.
With a satisfied nod, the old woman ladled out 3 bowls of soup for her and her guests. She and the young man sat at the table, while the dog took his dinner on the floor by the warm fire. Before long, George was begging for another helping while their host regaled them with stories of adventurous travel. They ate their way through the entire pot of bronze soup. She knew much about unicorns, fairies, mermaids, and even dragons. The dog continued to listen long after his master went to sleep in the bed graciously offered to him by the old woman. The sun rose, and she bid them farewell at the door after fixing them a pot of hot tea.
Will you be taking that magic ring with you, dear boys?
She asked.
You left it in my cook pot last night. Surely you will need it again.
Keep it, the dog said. We will reach our destination soon. Now you can make yourself bronze soup whenever you like. She granted them a single craggy smile, and they went on their way. George and his dog walked for another full day. The hills became steeper. There were more trees dotting the meadows and fields. In addition to rabbits and birds, they saw deer and squirrels. And as the sun began to dip closer to the horizon, the pair reached a wall of trees. They had come to the farthest edge of the summer lands. The road disappeared into the greenery, on towards the border situated in the depths of the autumn forest. George stood in the waning light and looked into the dimness beyond, where fireflies drifted.
Must we go this way?
He asked.
It looks chill in there.
Do not worry, master, the dog replied, trotting forward.
We have nearly reached the place where you can hide, never to be found until I return. What sort of place is it?
George wondered.
You will see it soon,
the dog assured him kindly.
In the meantime, you will not freeze, nor will you have to venture any farther into the cold countries.
Though hesitant, George did as the dog said and entered the forest. He was immediately surrounded by strange-sounding birds, scratching noises, rustling leaves, and twittering giggles. It was impossible to know what was beyond the next tree, for they were so big and sat so close together that hardly any late afternoon sun penetrated the canopy. Only the giant oak at home was bigger. The path twisted like a snake between root structures as complicated as ancient ruins. George made sure to stay close to his dog, lest they lose sight of each other, for even white fur looked dappled and greenish here. Just as the air began to turn cool and sleepy, they came across a grassy clearing illuminated by the last rays of daylight. They left the road to have a better look. The clearing was perfectly round, clear of stones and rubbish, and all but silent. The trees here seemed to bend away from the open air. Almost no branches dared reach out. On the ground were at least 100 gray toadstools growing in a circle, each with a wide-brimmed bonnet.
That's a fairy ring,
George exclaimed at the sight.
We have to leave. Everyone knows to stay clear of those.
While George hung back, clinging to a tree trunk, his dog walked out onto the soft grass.
Is it?
He asked, sniffing at the mushrooms.
I'm sure fairy rings are only formed by poisonous red fungi. This one must be safe. No, I'm sure it is dangerous,
George insisted.
If you step foot inside, you'll be whisked away to the fairy realm.
Will I? Asked the dog, and he hopped into the circle. George's cry of dismay died in his throat.
Oh,
he said, watching the dog sniff around some more and even take a tentative bite of a bonnet.
I suppose you are right. Such a clever thing you are. Say, why don't we collect a few of those for your knapsack?
What a good idea, master, said the dog. This one looks to be the biggest. The young man happily came forward and picked up his leg to avoid stepping on the delicate toadstool caps. His shoe touched the grass at the center of the ring, and he promptly vanished.